Honda is bringing a different engine to Zandvoort on the 23rd of August, and the reported gap it is trying to close is 60 horsepower. The man who runs the program trackside has now said the revised unit hit its internal target. He also refused to say what the target was. So the whole question of this second half of the season sits inside one component that most people have never seen a picture of, and it is roughly the size of a thimble. Here is exactly what happened. Honda released a video in the days before the summer break, and in it Shintaro Orihara, the trackside general manager and chief engineer of the program, confirmed that the updated power unit has met the internal objective set for it. His words, as published, were that he could not reveal the exact figures, but that the internal target had been achieved. That is the whole disclosure. No power number, no dyno curve, no percentage. And that matters because of what had been circulating before it. A figure of 50 brake horsepower had been reported as the size of the step. Orihara was asked about it directly and pushed back, saying he would like to have that number, that it was a big number, and that his own feeling was that it was not the real one. Read that carefully because it is unusual. An engine manufacturer with a bad season and a nervous customer was handed a flattering number by the press and turned it down. That is either discipline or it is a man who knows the figure and knows it is smaller. Hold that refusal. It comes back, and when it does, it explains the entire shape of the upgrade. Now, the limit and the margin, because this is a regulated development, not a free one. The reported deficit to Red Bull Ford Powertrains sits around 60 horsepower. That figure is not Honda's, it comes from reporting, and Honda has never confirmed it. But it is large enough to have put Honda inside a specific mechanism, and that mechanism is the interesting part. Under the framework, the sport now runs for power unit convergence, referred to as ADUO. A manufacturer that sits far enough behind the benchmark is granted additional development allowance, extra dynamometer hours, extra room inside the cost cap, and it is a sliding scale, not a switch, with Red Bull Ford Powertrains set as the reference point against which everyone else is measured. So the 60 is doing two jobs at once. It is the problem, and it is the budget to fix the problem. And this is where the document has to come in, because the regulations were revised while everyone was on holiday. The FIA published an updated version of the 2026 technical regulations on the 5th of August. The changes reported from that publication run through the energy side of the car. Article C 5.2.8, sub 3, deals with the power curve during any period of limited power. As reported, maximum electrical output is held at 250 kilowatts up to 310 kilometers per hour, then falls away progressively down to 100 kilowatts by 340 and cuts out entirely above 345. Article C 5.2.10, sub 2, reduces the maximum recoverable energy per lap in sprint and in qualifying from 5 megajoules to 4. I want to be straight with you about the sourcing on those two article numbers. I have the numbers and the values from reporting of the FIA publication, and not from the published document in front of me. If the numbering has moved, the mechanism has not. And the mechanism is what we are here for. Remember the word Orihara used about milliseconds. That comes back in about 6 minutes. And it is the single most revealing thing anyone at Honda has said this year. If you are getting something out of this, subscribe. It is the only thing that decides whether this channel keeps being made. And tell me in the comments which country you are watching from, because I read those and I have no idea how far this thing travels. So here is what the part actually does. A pre-chamber is a small volume sitting above the main combustion chamber, connected to it by a set of narrow holes. The spark plug does not fire into the main chamber, it fires into the pre-chamber. That small charge lights pressure spikes inside that little volume, and the burning gas is forced out through the holes as a set of high-speed jets. Those jets are the point. Instead of one flame front crawling outward from a single spark in the middle of a big chamber, you get several jets of already burning gas thrown deep into the main charge simultaneously. The mixture is lit from multiple places at once and from the inside out. Think of lighting a gas hob, one spark at the edge of the ring, and the flame walks around to the far side. Now imagine the ring lighting at 8 points at the same time. Same fuel, same air, same ring. It is simply over faster. Faster is the whole benefit, and it is not about drama. A faster burn means the combustion is finished closer to the point where the piston can actually do something with it. which raises efficiency. It also means the unburned mixture sitting in the far corners of the chamber spends less time being cooked by rising pressure before the flame reaches it, and that is the mixture that knocks. Less time waiting means more knock margin. More knock margin means you can run leaner, or run more boost or advance the timing, and every one of those is power. Orihara said the pre-chamber has been modified specifically to accelerate the combustion process. That is the sentence. Everything else Honda has said about this engine is a list, and that one is a mechanism. So, questions. Why does a faster burn matter more in 2026 than it did 2 years ago? Because the fuel is 100% sustainable under the fuel article, and the burn characteristics of that fuel are not the burn characteristics of what came before. Why does Honda need more knock margin specifically? Because with the internal combustion side now producing roughly half of total output, rather than most of it, every remaining thermal percentage point is worth more per unit of mass. Why did nobody see this coming? They did. Honda said an upgrade was coming to the Dutch Grand Prix weeks ago. What nobody had was the component. And here is the part that separates this upgrade from every other upgrade this season. Honda has described the changes as internal: combustion efficiency, friction reduction, lubrication, a pre-chamber, a piston, an oil system. Which means Aston Martin does not have to reconfigure the AMR 26 around it. Put that next to what the same team did 3 weeks earlier. At the Hungarian Grand Prix, Aston Martin declared 16 separate items on the FIA's upgrade submissions: a reshaped front wing, new end plates, a longer and thinner nose, external front brake ducts, 4 grouped floor items covering all of the permitted surfaces, a revised side pod inlet, rear suspension work, a rear wing. Every one of those had to be declared, drawn, justified with a stated reason, and published. The engine change gets none of that treatment. Same team, same fortnight, 2 completely different regulatory routes, and only one of them arrives with a public paper trail. That asymmetry is why power unit development is so much harder to cover, honestly, than aerodynamic development. And it is why so much of what you read about engines this year is a number somebody guessed. Quick one. Is a hidden engine gain worth more than a visible aero gain, or is the transparency worth more to the sport? Like this video if you think the engine route should be published the same way. Comment if you think it should stay closed. And subscribe while you are there. Now the neighbouring parts, because nothing internal is ever only internal. Friction reduction and lubrication changes travel outward whether the engineers want them to or not. Reduce friction, and you reduce the heat you are dumping into the oil, which changes what the oil cooler has to do, which changes the mass flow you need through the side pod inlet. Aston Martin revised that side pod inlet in Hungary before the engine arrived. Change the oil specification and you change the film thickness in the bearings, which changes how the unit behaves in the first 2 laps out of the garage on a cold Zandvoort morning, which changes the tyre warm-up window that the driver actually feels. And there is the one that has haunted this partnership all year: vibration. The AMR 26 was late to the first pre-season test in Barcelona, and then vibration from the Honda unit severely limited its running across all 3 tests and into the opening races. At the first round in Australia, both cars failed to finish with damage traced to that issue. When you change pistons, you change reciprocating mass. When you change reciprocating mass, you change the excitation the whole rear of the car sees. So here is the number, converted. 60 horsepower at the speeds this car spends most of a lap at is not a headline. It is a couple of tenths on a long straight and almost nothing in a slow corner, which is exactly why the deficit looked catastrophic at Spa and looked survivable at the Hungaroring. The data backs that. Figures from Paddock put Aston Martin's race pace deficit in Hungary at just over 2 seconds per lap. At Silverstone and at Spa, before the aero package, that deficit was over 5 seconds per lap. 2 long power-sensitive circuits, and 1 short, downforce-sensitive one. The chassis package took the majority of that step, and it took it at the track that flattered it most. Now, the milliseconds. This is the promise I made you, and here is the payment. Orihara described the target for Zandvoort as getting back to what he called the racing field. Not the podium, not the points. The racing field. And he defined it precisely. The situation where the 10 or 20 milliseconds a team fights for every weekend actually make a difference to where you finish. Sit with that. The chief engineer of a works Formula One power unit program has publicly defined success as reaching the point where normal engineering effort matters again. That is a man telling you the deficit is currently so large that ordinary competence is invisible inside it. Nobody at Honda has said 60, but that sentence is a bigger admission than any number would have been. The sequence in order, because it explains the pace of all this. Adrian Newey arrived in March of 2025, and the design office held its key decisions on the 2026 car until he did, which put the program over 3 months behind rivals when development began in earnest. The car ran late in testing. Alonso was 2.462 seconds off the front in Australia. By Monaco in early June, Cadillac in their first season were out-qualifying them. At Spa, both cars were slowest of all, with Alonso over 5 seconds off pole. Hungary brought the 16 items, and the cars finished 13th and 14th. Zandvoort brings the engine, and Honda has indicated further staged work after that, at Monza and at Baku, 2 of the 3 fastest circuits of the year, immediately after the engine step. That ordering is not an accident. The structural point is this. None of these dates are chosen by the engineers. The convergence framework decides how much extra dyno time Honda gets. The cost cap decides how many parts they can iterate before choosing one. And the calendar decides that a manufacturer who wants a summer step has to have it signed off before the shutdown, because you cannot run a dyno through a mandated factory closure. The upgrade lands at Zandvoort because Zandvoort is the first race after the shutdown ends, not because Zandvoort is the right track for it. And here is the question the coverage did not ask this week. Honda completed a filming day with the new unit before its race debut. Everyone reported that as reassurance. But a filming day is 100 kilometers, run at restricted conditions, on a car that is not in race trim. What exactly does that validate? It validates installation, sealing, oil and water temperatures at low load, and that nothing falls off. It validates almost nothing about the drivability question that Honda themselves have raised. Because drivability is a complaint that appears at the limit in the entry and exit of corners, over a race distance. So the honest position going into the Dutch Grand Prix is that the reliability box is partly ticked and the behaviour box is not ticked at all. Watch the second sector on Friday. That is where you will find out. If this is the level of detail you want on the technical side of this sport, subscribe now, because the next part is the one that actually explains why Honda would not give you a power figure. So, follow the flame for a second, at the limit. A pre-chamber is spectacular at high load, and it is awkward at low load. At full throttle, the main chamber is packed with mixture. The jets punch into a dense charge, and everything works. At low load with a lean and thin charge, those same jets can shoot straight through, without lighting much of anything, or the pre-chamber itself can misfire because there is not enough there to burn cleanly. Then you get a cycle that produces almost no torque, followed by a cycle that produces plenty. The driver does not experience that as a combustion event. He experiences it as the engine arriving late on corner exit. That is drivability. And that is why Honda has said, in their own words, that they built tools specifically to optimize it. Now stack the energy regulations on top. As reported from the August publication, electrical output holds at 250 kilowatts and then tapers away above 310 kilometers per hour, gone entirely above 345. Recoverable energy per lap in qualifying drops to 4 megajoules. So at the very top of the speed range, the electrical contribution is falling off a cliff. And what is left holding the car up is the combustion engine alone. A faster burn is worth the most precisely where the battery is worth the least. And this is what Orihara actually revealed, which is the reason this video exists. He did not give a power figure. He named the component, and he named the objective for it. And those two things together tell you where Honda believes it lost the season. Not in the turbo, not in the battery, in the speed of the burn. A manufacturer that thought its problem was deployment would be talking about software. This one is talking about a pre-chamber and a piston. Nothing is free. A faster, harder burn puts higher peak pressure and a steeper pressure rise onto the piston crown, the rings and the bearings, and it does it thousands of times a minute for a season. With a homologated part count, Honda has bundled friction reduction and lubrication work into the same upgrade, and I would suggest those are not 3 separate ideas. They are one idea and its two consequences. You made the burn faster, so you now have to survive the burn. And the moment you take that in, the phrase long list of improvements stops sounding like marketing and starts sounding like a repair schedule. The strongest argument against everything I've just said is this, and it is a fair one. Honda has not published a single number. Not power, not efficiency, not target. Everything above is a mechanism built on a component name and an engineer's stated objective, and mechanisms are cheap. It is entirely possible the pre-chamber change is a modest revision inside a package where the real gain came from somewhere Honda has not mentioned at all, and we would have no way of knowing. I think that argument is right about the uncertainty and wrong about the inference. When a manufacturer volunteers exactly one specific technical detail out of a list it is otherwise protecting, that detail is usually the one they are proud of. And what I genuinely cannot tell you is whether this closes the gap or halves it. Orihara said there is no magic in this sport, and that Honda will not reach Mercedes or Red Bull Powertrains in a single step. He called the Netherlands a first step, with more required after it. That is the most reliable guidance available, and it is deliberately unhelpful. So here is where it lands. 60 horsepower is a reported number that Honda has never confirmed, and the number they did confirm is worth more. They hit an internal target they will not describe by making the burn faster in a component you cannot see from outside the car. The chassis already found roughly 3 seconds a lap between Spa and the Hungaroring. If the engine finds the rest, then the 10 and 20 milliseconds Orihara talked about start mattering again, and Aston Martin stops being a story about how far off they are and becomes a story about who they are racing. That is the entire target. Not victory. Relevance. Real step or a filming day and a good press video. Like the video if you think Zandvoort shows a genuine gain. Comment if you think we see nothing until Monza. And tell me which manufacturer you think ends this season third on power, because I want that on record before the 23rd. The Dutch Grand Prix runs on the 23rd of August, and that is when the first version of this engine turns a competitive lap. We covered the 16-part Hungary package, and what it did to the diffuser at higher rear ride heights, and the next one follows the other half of this story, which is what happens when a chassis built around a weak engine suddenly gets a stronger one. Subscribe so that lands in front of you. Until the next one.